All right, folks, welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is a very unusual meetup for me. Normally, I like to do meetups. I do meetups on things I don't know. This one I have been studying for a long time, so this is very unusual, very odd. I'm talking about stuff I know. At the same time, I've known this for some time, so I'm really looking forward to everybody's feedback on what their thoughts are. So I'm going to try to make it more interactive, as interactive as I can. So there are two parts that I have. One is both these ideas are ideas of Mortimer Adler, and they've had both of them have had a profound impact on me. The first idea comes from the book, How to Read a Book. And the second idea comes from his work on the great books of the Western world. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the first idea, which is, the core idea there is called Syntopical Reading. And I'm going to give you reasons why you absolutely need to read How to Read a Book before you read any other book. Hopefully it'll be convincing, and I'll take whatever questions you have. And then we're going to do breakout rooms. Then we'll come back. And for the second part, I'm going to talk about the great books of the Western world and the core idea of Syntopicon and how that has changed how I think and why you need to read that. In order to be educated, I think you need to read that. It's very hard to get that kind of education that easily. So those are the two things that I'm going to talk about. So I'm not prepared much because I think I can speak about this in my sleep, and maybe I do. So let me just go ahead and talk first about syntopical reading and how to read a book. Okay. To give you a spoiler, it has improved my reading efficiency and effectiveness, not efficiency, but effectiveness at least 10 times minimum, probably more, okay? And it has just opened up this entire world of books to me. The context is this: there are about 20 million books out there, give or take some, and about 1 million books are being published every year. Now, step back and look at what a book is, okay? A book is something incredible because somebody spends their entire life, years and years thinking about something, and they're going to put this in this little thing called a book, and they're going to give it to you for 20 bucks, okay? What a deal, what a deal, okay? But you got a limited life. You don't have that much time. And there are 20 million books out there, 1 million books coming out every year. How are you going to navigate through this in order to get at what you need to get at? Okay, that's the problem that we're trying to solve. Second thing is that books vary in quality quite a bit. There are most books, like 90% of the books are not worth reading at all. Then another of the remaining ones, another 90% of them are probably worth just skimming. Few of them may have a couple of things that you can pick up, but at the same time, on the other end of the highest value, there are books, and there are books I've read more than a dozen times, which are so deep that every time you go to them, you get tremendous value out of it. So it's not, all books are not made equal. There's a tremendous variation of quality. So how do you navigate this space? That is the problem that Mortimer Adler solves in his book, How to Read a Book, okay? So what do you do? Okay, now I have actually done this, and I've been doing this for about 20 years now, more than that, maybe closer to 25 years. There are two ideas in the book. So I'm going to spoil the book for you by telling you the key to the book, okay? There are only two ideas in the book that are core. First idea is called active reading versus passive reading. Most people pick up a book, they start reading from the beginning and go to the end. It's a very bad idea, very bad idea, okay? That is passive. That is, you're letting somebody else dictate what you're doing with your mind, okay? What Mortimer Adler advocates is active reading. So what is active reading? Active reading is you should have questions in your mind about what you're trying to figure out. And you should find the books, not one book, but as many books that are likely to help you answer that question. So you don't take in a book like watching TV passively. Okay, no. You have to be active. It's not spectator sport. Reading is not spectator sport. It is a participatory sport, okay? So what do you do? So firstly, decide what you want to know. And then he has this entire system of how do you go about it, okay? And I've actually done this. I've done this before the internet age. Now with internet age, it has become far more efficient, but so I'm going to give you the version before internet age. So you can see it's much more visceral. You can get the principle more easily. And this is what he describes in the book, because this was written, I think, 50 odd years ago. It's a classic. So what do you do? So I've done this in, at that time I was in Seattle. So I've done this in University of Washington library. And the librarian would always look at me weird every time I tried to do this, but I would still do it. So what you do is you firstly identify what question that you're trying to answer. And then you go and bring to, I would have a table. So I'm going to describe it to you in physical terms so you can see what it means. I would firstly use the catalog to search everywhere where those possible books can be. Then I would go and browse the catalogs, browse the stacks. So pull out a book, and he has methods of what he calls inspectional reading. You look at the title of the book, you look at the table of contents, you quickly read, and so within less than 2-3 minutes, or sometimes even less, you make a judgment call on whether this book is going to help you, and try to make a judgment call about the quality of the book. And if it meets a basic level, you go and put it on your table, okay? So you're going through many different sections, it's not just one area. You're trying to follow this through multiple stacks, multiple subjects, okay, multiple categorization. It doesn't matter how somebody else has categorized a book. You are looking for an answer to your question, and you seek it wherever you think you can find it. So you go throughout the library, wherever you can, and just bring all the books. So I would be sitting there on a large table with about maybe 50, 60 books in front of me. Okay, that's step number one. Okay, so that requires inspectional reading. Okay, and again, Mortimer Adler is going to describes in detail. How do you do that? How do you quickly get that? Okay, so now I'm sitting there now with 60 books on my table. 60 books is a little too large to read. So now you need to go to the next level. So then you use, again, inspectional reading, where you're now your standards now have become maybe 3 times, 4 times higher than when you started out. Firstly, you get a sense of what has been written about it. What's the range? So those 60 books, now you've gone through the entire library to find those on the topic. You get a sense of the range of what has been produced by human beings on that topic, okay, which you did not have. If you went and picked up a book that looks kind of interesting or somebody recommends, you would not have no idea of the range of things, the time periods, the sheer quantity of stuff of what you're looking for. So you get an idea of how much thinking human beings have done about this topic. Okay, so that pile of books itself, even in this step, you've gotten something about how how much thinking has gone into this topic. Then you start going again through the process of inspectional reading, this time with a much higher standard. So you would read maybe few paragraphs of the introduction. You go jump to the conclusion. So this is like, imagine, see, most people read like a snail traveling on the surface with their head and eyes glued to what is immediately right next to them. And they go through the books that way. This, to give you a visual analogy, this is like being an eagle. Okay, you're flying above all these books and you're trying to zoom in and fly, kind of dive into things and then again zooming in back. So you're trying to take in this entire space and you're trying to evaluate these books of saying, okay, which ones seem to be most effective at approaching the topic that you're trying to approach. And you use, these higher standards and more detailed inspection of kind of introductions, conclusions, what are the sections that are covered. You narrow it down to maybe about 10 or 10 to 15 books. Now this is kind of coming closer to the books that are there. Then you kind of try to see what is being repeated and what is unique and try to kind of eliminate a little bit more until you have maybe about 4 to 6 books, which will give you. Now, remember that all the work that you've done is not wasted. If you, for example, you can say, I'm eliminating this book because this seems too detailed because it focuses on something. So if anything that is valuable that you're discarding, you can keep notes of that. So you can always go back to expand that, okay? But now you're down to 4 to 6 books. And now here comes the part which really stuns people. You start reading all of the books at the same time, okay? You start reading them all together. So what are you trying to do? What you're trying to do is that you're actually trying to create a conversation between these authors to figure out how to approach the topic. And you are actually talking to them. So you are trying to keep track of your ideas. You're trying to say, okay, what is the basis for it? What is the structure, hierarchy of concepts that this person is using? What is the evidence base that this person is using? And you're comparing it to, comparing it to the others to kind of build the thing. In the process, you will find that some of the books are meeting that better than the others. Ones that are not producing good results for you, you drop them. So maybe you start with more, or you can, in the process, you can say, you will notice sometimes that there are lacunas, there are big holes. You say, oh, this one is a really critical point that is not being dealt with. Then you might go in to do another kind of inspectional process in order to fill that hole, to add books. So you're adding and subtracting books as you're reading them. But what you're doing is that you're creating a conversation between these authors and yourself. All these authors are talking to each other, and you're talking to all of them in order to figure things out. Sometimes you may disagree with all of them, and you may come up with something, but that is as a result of actually considering what everybody else has had to say about it. So it will have a much more solid base for it. And you're doing this now in writing. You're doing a lot of, mind mapping, trying to kind of map everybody's ideas, and you proceed like that. Now, typically what happens is that in the process, you will find like 1 or 2 or 3 books, which are amazingly good. And then you read everything. First you kind of do the inspectional, you go ahead and go through the chapters. By the way, you're not reading chronologically. You might be reading one section in this and the other section in that. You might say that this book I've chosen because they deal with this topic better than anybody else, and this topic needs, I need information on this. So what you're doing is that you're reading out of order, but the order that you're creating is you're creating your own structure of concepts as you see fit. So that is the kind of the basic process. Okay. So I've been talking for about 15 minutes to give you an overview. Now, the thing is that this is something that I'm extremely familiar with. So I'm sure I'm kind of skipping things and I'm missing several things. So now I welcome questions. Feel free, in order to, again, we have the standard 4 rules that we have. Type exclamation mark to ask questions. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. So let me first take Donna's question. What about audiobooks? Audiobooks, it doesn't work like that. Audio is a sequential medium. This is all about approaching things parallelly. I hate audiobooks because of that. I can't handle them. Maybe there are other methods. I don't know about them. But this is effective in the written world. So that's my quick answer to that. Next up is Kate, Joe, and Donna. Kate, what's your question?
Yeah, I was an academic librarian in a former life, and like with journal articles, what we suggested for doing a literature review was looking at the citations, and kind of similar in terms of the conversation. Everybody's having a conversation with each other and citing each other. So that is what we recommended, was following the trail of citations, basically. And I'm wondering if there is an added benefit to reading things in parallel, like you suggest, rather than sequentially by citation.
Okay, wonderful. Great question. So parallel versus sequential. I'm a very big fan of parallel approach, because what happens in sequential approach is that you're buying into another person's way of looking at something. Whereas in a parallel approach, and parallel is basically you're kind of looking at multiple sequences at the same time. The writing is, of course, sequential. So you're kind of running them in parallel, and you're trying to compare the advantages and disadvantages of various approach. So the biggest disadvantage of reading just one book through is that you're giving too much credit to the author. You're putting, and the thing is that it's worth doing that at the end. Once you have kind of looked at everything in parallel, everything everybody has to say, and if you've determined that this particular author or these two particular authors have the best approach to it, then yes, absolutely, you go in, you dive into that. But the thing is that it is a way of, and this is a method. There are many premises here. Okay, one of the premise is that of kind of polymath or comprehensivist approach, is that you should be studying a lot of things all the time. So this is a generic method to study anything at any level of detail and proceeding it to any as far as you want or as little as you want. So it's a far more flexible method of going about doing that. Joe?
So during the inspectional phase, the idea of how we analyze statements within that framework, the book speaks to that, how to look at it, whether it's an author statement or whether it's an opinion. And that's how we kind of do the skimming of the book. Am I pretty much capturing that correctly? Because it's, you start asking the questions not only that you want answered, but some of the questions that the author wanted to answer, with the book itself.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what he calls analytical reading. And I'm deliberately not focusing on that because that is, I think the idea of kind of basic idea of active reading, that you have to be active, and then the idea of syntopical reading are the things that are truly revolutionary. Analytical reading is great. He has this entire section on analytical reading of how do you actually make sure that you get what the author is saying. How do you kind of think in the terms think so he has ways that's a way of kind of drilling down of things, and he has tools for doing that as well. But today what I want to focus on is I want to focus on the idea of syntopical reading, because that's the thing that really liberates you from, it just kind of frees you up to actually access those 20 million books that are out there. So that's why I'm focusing on it. But Joe, you're absolutely right. He has tools for that, and I definitely recommend that. But this idea of syntopical reading is really his hallmark. Nobody else talks about this, so that's why I'm focusing on this.
Thank you.
Next up is Donna.
You answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Let's see. Are there other questions? Anybody else? Okay, what is the definition of syntopical? Okay, very good. Very good question. Sorry, see, I take so much for granted. So syntopical, topic, sin. Sin means everything on that topic. I'm bringing together everything on the topic. So you're focused on a topic, and then you bring to bear everything that is based on that. So that's what is meant by syntopical. Okay, folks, if you have a question, just type an exclamation mark in the beginning, so I can very easily separate it out from there. Next up is Mike. Mike, I'm sure you've read this book. I think you've read most of the books.
Well, I like to say that I channel much of what you've read. So I haven't read all of the 100,000 books in the ISBN catalog, but I've read a lot of them that you've said. And actually, growing up in the shadow of the University of Chicago, Adler was part of my life, so to speak. I believe there's some material that ties this to Alice in Wonderland that is somewhat profound.
Yes. But please do that briefly, though. Go ahead.
Very briefly, sampling theory is what Charles Dodgson, who is Lewis Carroll, came up with. So he described, and he has a thing about the Cheshire Cat, how the Cheshire Cat read a book and discussed it with Alice. And he said, you don't, he asked Alice, how does she read a book? And so she said she opens it in front and reads it starts reading the first page until she's finished. And he said, and the Cheshire Cat said, that's absurd. And Alice said, how do you read a book? And well, I opened the book up at some random point, and until I understand that page, sampling theory again, then I go back to maybe I go back to the table of contents, and maybe after 10 iterations of this, I know everything that the author meant to say in that book.
Excellent.
Now, there's another thing he said. He described why some people read, some nations read from left to right, and some people read from right to left. And what drives that is some alphabets don't have vowels. And
Okay.
The alphabets that don't have vowels.
Mike, we are going too far off.
All right, the sampling theory, and he described exactly what you described and gave the mathematical basis in terms of sampling theory, statistical sampling.
So the other thing the point I would make regarding sampling is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to also judge the quality of thought of the people that you're reading books of, okay? If you just pick up a book and start reading it, you have no frame of reference. And you will find that there are people who are profound and only when you kind of discover, like if all in this pile of 60 books, you typically find like one or two people whose approach will just blow you away. And then everything else seems kind of plodding along and just copies of copies. You can see the originality of thought. So even like this process of actually, it's a way of putting you in touch with a whole range of minds. So you can pick not only, so the other part to remember is that you're just not trying to answer this particular thing. You're trying to learn about the world. So you're going to get so much at the level of methods and all kinds of other things if you're using this kind of approach, because you're able to compare kind of methods of approaches, the way in which people abstract things, way in which people present. So there are observations happening at multiple levels. Next up is Charles.
Can I add one more thing before I go away?
Mike,
Just real short, real short.
Exactly on point, Mike.
On point.
Yes.
He asked, the Cheshire Cat asked Alice, why is she holding the book upside down? And the Cheshire Cat had a brilliant answer. That's to remove preconceived notions of what's in the book. And if he reads it upside down, he can really understand it.
Okay, that's good point. So like, so Mike, the thing is that though you talk a lot, you make so many interesting points, but it's just, if you could do this as, inspired by Alice in Wonderland, if you could say what you're saying in half the time and say twice as much on point, you would be producing 64 times the value that you do. But anyway, this is a great point. See, this is also another important thing, because what you're doing is that you have to realize those 60 books that are there come from very different perspectives. They are not in the same stack. You're trying to look at a topic on psychology, but you would have picked up books from art and sociology and politics and epistemology and just everything, and ethics. So what you're doing is that you are challenging approach. And how should you approach this question? And you are comparing and contrasting these different approaches. And they are all challenges to you. And they're saying, how should you think about this topic? So it is a dramatic way of expanding your context so you can really think about a topic. Charles, you're next.
Yeah, hi, Shugan. Thanks for the very interesting topic, and this is very helpful. So I'm kind of wondering, this is obviously a very great method. What are some of the pitfalls or challenges that, since you have done this a lot, that you want us to be aware of? I mean, for some of that, I can see that because we're going, so deep and so wide, could be challenges in terms of organizing things and preventing yourself from getting lost, or maybe even the unknown, in the sense that before you understand what is out there, how can you organize a certain structure for reading all those things?
Yeah, that's excellent question. Excellent question. I have a very simple answer to that. See, each of us is different. We have to develop methods that work for us. Okay, so you will have to figure out ways of kind of applying it to yourself. One simple idea is to give yourself very severe time limits. You should try to do everything in, again, inspired by Alice in Wonderland, half the time, or like 1/10 the time. You give yourself a very small amount of time to do something, because this kind of thing, you can very easily spend a lot more time. And you will find that if you ask yourself to do it in a much shorter period of time, you will produce many results. Other aspect of this method is that of feedback loops. Everything that you're doing, once you do one pass over it, that gives you a perspective that enables your next pass to be far more effective. If you took 10 times the amount of time for that one pass, you have lost the advantage that you would get through successive passes. So the biggest suggestion I have is that have very strict deadlines for yourself, and try to do it in, maybe 1/4 the time that you think you can do it in. And you will find that even if you can't achieve 1/4, maybe you can achieve 1/3. And that's going to accelerate the process because you will be able to do more passes on it.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's a great suggestion.
Thank you. Next up is Lynn. Lynn, go ahead.
No, I was just having some trouble how you would do that with fiction. So if you go to the conclusion, I mean, it ruins the story.
Very quickly, don't do this with fiction. This is not, this is really for nonfiction. Though he has stuff to say about fiction, this syntopical reading is not for fiction. If you want to do something on fiction, it would be at a completely different level. It would be a different kind of a project. But no, this, everything, that's a very good point. Everything I've said so far really applies to nonfiction, not to fiction.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let me see if there is anybody else. There are so many people. Okay, let me see. Okay, there are so many things. I can't go through all of them. Okay, does anybody have questions? Okay, Steve, go ahead. Steven.
Yes, thanks. In the video, you mentioned using Amazon reviews. So could you explain how you would do that? Because the way that I choose a book that I want to read is I'll read a book review in either the New York Review of Books or the New York Times on a topic that I like. And if it's a rave review and looks like a good book, I buy it. So what you're saying?
No. That's you're depending on somebody else's thing. So the idea of syntopical reading is that there are 20 million books out there, and you need a method, general method, to deal with that. So, you bring up a great point. This book was written about 50 years ago. There was no internet at that time. So how does internet change things? Okay, I use internet a lot for this. So for me, internet has just turbocharged this method. What happens with internet is that it is a lot more easier now to do what I call triangulation. Okay, so I do many things. So so let me just expand that. Okay, I've actually expanded his method in multiple directions. Okay, so one is about Amazon reviews. So Amazon reviews provide a great source because this is basically a whole bunch of people commenting of what they got from the book. After getting used to it, you actually have to master each medium that you use. Once you get used to it and say, okay, you should be able to tell which of the reviewers are really good reviewers and which ones are, not worth paying attention to. So once you get used to kind of going through reviews and saying, okay, which ones you should look at, you can actually get a lot of information about the book through the Amazon reviews. You can get a lot through, there are a whole bunch of websites that try to summarize the book. You use everything that is being done. At the same time, you're continuously judging the work of every reviewer, everybody who's doing a synopsis of a book. I don't like the audio format, so I don't use the, typically I don't use the YouTube video, or sometimes I will run it and then just read. But all of these are different people now can have provided you with a summary, but that is, you have to realize also that it's their summary. So it is like one data point, but you can use those data points in order to really speed things up. Okay, so that's one thing. But the biggest way in which I have extended his method is through meetups. Okay, so what I do is that, as I said, this is unusual that I'm talking about something I know. Usually I talk about things I don't know. I do meetups on things that I'm trying to learn about. And when I do meetups, when I did meetups in New York, every time people would show up who have spent decades studying the same thing. Okay, decades studying something that I'm just trying to get started. And they give me all the work that they have done, all the analysis. So it's kind of crowdsourcing. And so that's the reason I do meetups, actually. That's the only reason. That's the primary reason I do meetups, to accelerate my learning process.
Well, you do the meetup, you don't have to read the book.
What's that?
If you do some of these meetups, you don't even have to read the book.
That's not true. No. It's not. It's you have to. Books are valuable. You
I
need
know.
to be able to choose which books to read. Which books to read. See, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to maximize the effectiveness of your reading. You're not trying to reduce your effort. You're trying to actually increase the effort dramatically. And you're, so that's what it is. But great question. It does, internet changes everything. And number two, if crowdsourcing is a primary way, and here you have the opportunity in our meetups to do exactly that. Even as a kid, one of the first questions I asked anybody I met was, what is your favorite book? And I still do that. So that's another way of scaling it up. Julian asks, can you apply this to biographies? Well, yes and no. Biographies is harder. It depends on why you're reading the biography. All of this is about active reading. So for example, there are some people I really want to know about, like people like Leonardo, for example. I'm a big fan of Leonardo. So I've gone through, maybe not read, but I have about maybe, before I got rid of most of my library, I had about like 40 books on Leonardo. And I've gone through many of them. I've basically, but even in trying to get biographies, right? You're not trying to read one biography, you're trying to read, Leonardo is a good example. So basically I got everything that was, everything that I could get my hands on that was available. I would go to the used bookstores and I would collect everything. And I would read all of them together. And that will tell you actually what is significant, what is not significant, what is, so you don't necessarily, so the idea of just reading one biography is not something, because you're depending too much on that biographer, it's very difficult to interpret lives of people. So if you actually are running, when I wanted to study Leonardo, I looked at all biographies. So it was like 10, 12 biographies. I'm not reading chronologically. I'm trying to say, okay, what are the key points in his life? And what did I get from it? And then again, soon, like some of the biographers will drop off because I saw that, okay, the level of the insight that they had was very low, as opposed to these 3 or 4 biographers. Then I would focus on them, and then I would go in details. And again, this is not a substitute. There are books that I've read, a dozen times. There is one, my favorite book is Louis Sullivan's Kindergarten Chats. I actually rewrote the whole book because that's the best way of actually reading a book. You write it. So tremendous amount of effort is worth spending on these books, but this is a way of optimizing what you're trying to do. Let me see, Kevin. Syntopical way of news. Let's keep news aside for now. Jairo, you're next.
Thank you. So this is very interesting. I kind of have been doing something like that, but not so disciplined as you describe it, because you're saying that you want to formulate a question before you go into the library or whatever. But what if you have kind of an interest in a subject, say Indian philosophy, and so you get a book on it, and then you find another book similar to it, and then you get it, and then you get another one kind of like it. They're a little bit different. So would you want to kind of formulate a more focused question and then go through all of them at the same time, like read a page?
No,
switch to another one.
Let me describe. Let me answer the question. I think I get your question. Suppose you are interested in Indian philosophy. How would you go about applying this method? So no. You don't never start with a book. You never start with one book. You always get as many books as you can. So you go to the library, go through, browse through Amazon to see all the books that are available on Indian philosophy. read the Amazon reviews, read all kinds, read kind of summaries of these books. So start by looking at, a whole bunch of books on Indian philosophy. So, here also, when you say I'm interested in Indian philosophy, you're simply asking the question, what is Indian philosophy? Right? That's the question. What is Indian philosophy? That's the question you're trying to answer. And everything that I've said applies to that. So you have to start, suppose I was doing that, and I would start just, like 50, 60 books minimum, and then start to kind of do the inspectional readings, bring it down to maybe 4 or 5 books that I'm reading. You'll find something as complex as Indian philosophy. You will realize that there are kind of periods. So you will develop a more fine-grained strategy for each of the things that you're studying, based on what how you study. What you see is the complexity of the topic. So the way you would study some large subject like Indian philosophy would be different than a much narrower topic that you're trying to answer. Okay, let's see. Kate, go ahead.
So what if the books that you're reading are not arranged in the same way? Like, how do you find, how do you work around having to jump around the different books to find where the parallel content is?
Excellent. That's again a great question. So what you have to do, the principle here is that you are trying to arrange things in your own mind, and you're looking at arrangements of several people. So you're typically looking at arrangements of these 50, let's say we've got 50, 60 books on the table. You're looking at all the arrangements of all of these people. Now, if you have done, and remember these 50, 60 books you have chosen after looking at even, maybe 500 books. So these are the best, this from your inspectional reading, you thought that they were the most promising. And each of these people, each of these minds have put in their work in trying to organize it. So they have said that it should be organized something a certain way. And they are all different propositions of organization. And you kind of have to take all of that in and say, what is the structure of this field? Where should we begin? This person is saying here, this person is saying what makes sense to me. So you're trying to actually create organization. And when you read according to your organization. Now, at every point, you have to be conscious of the fact that you could be wrong. Okay, you may be right 80% of the time, so 20% chance you always have to assume that you're wrong, and then you're always looking for things. If you're not wrong, what would you see? Something like that. So it's not something, you are conscious that you're going through this process very rapidly, and you have to constantly check what you're doing and do kind of course corrections as you go on. Let me see. There's a lot of questions here. Let me see. All right. Alex is a question. Can this method be used to learn a language from a textbook more efficiently? I don't think so. I think languages is a completely different animal. Language is best learned through immersion. So what you would do is you would do kind of the equivalent of that, because language is a skill. You're trying to master doing something. So the way you would do that is that you would just, if I wanted to learn French, I would go and stay in Paris. And I would talk in French to everybody, even if they hate how I sound. I would try to get the accents right, because that's apparently very important to French. And I can say anything in the right accent and it will be all right. So I would come up with strategies that work. But I think immersion works really well with languages, just because it's a skill. So it's slightly different, I would say. All right, let's see. Language efficiency. Okay, all right, very good. Okay, so that was a very quick, quick take on this one. So what I want to do is I want to do breakout rooms for a few minutes, about 20 minutes, so we can talk about this, and then we can come back and talk about the next topic, which is going to be Mortimer Adler's you know what, I'm going to make the breakout rooms for a shorter period of time, 15 minutes. So we will have more time to talk about the great books. Okay, all right, I'm starting the breakout rooms now. All right, so the second topic that we're going to be talking about, unfortunately, I know this also, I've spent a lot of time, so I know this also a little bit, so, which is unusual. So this is about the great books of the Western world. What is this? So this is a project out of University of Chicago and Encyclopedia Britannica. What these folks in University of Chicago and Encyclopedia Britannica thought was that this was done about almost 60 years ago. They thought that people were losing track of the Western heritage, that people were just focused on the current fads and not really understanding the context of ideas that shape the current context. So they wanted to make thoughts, great thoughts of all thinkers available to anybody who wanted it. Okay, so that was the purpose. So they collected all the philosophers, all the scientists, all the novelists. That's what is unusual, that they did not just say, okay, humanities. No, or they did not say just philosophy. They included philosophy, but they also included science. They also included novelists. They also included, historians, psychologists, economists, basically all thinkers. They had a very strict cutoff. Initially, their cutoff was 1900, so the last person was Freud. And they have a very good reason for that, that it is difficult to get a perspective on our current time to figure out what is really valuable. Secondly, they were also very explicit that they were focused on Western conversation, not Eastern. They said, well, we would like to do Eastern, we'd like to do Indian and Chinese, which is very large, but we don't have the expertise to do that. And so they restricted themselves to the Western conversation, but they covered it very thoroughly. Okay, so it is a multi-volume set, about 50 odd volumes of Homer to Freud. And that was great. But they did something which was truly remarkable. They asked a very simple question. What do these people talk about? What is the conversation? They called it the great conversation because great thinkers actually take in stuff from everybody around them, everybody in the past, and then they add their own thoughts to it. So they asked, what do these people talk about? And they made this glossary of about 4,000 terms, and then they narrowed it down to these 103 great ideas. And for each of them, they have these nice little essays, between 8 to 10 page essays, which summarize what everybody in every field has talked about that idea. What are their thoughts? They are scrupulously fair to everybody. They present ideas of people in their context. And they give you an overview of it. It's incredible because what happens is that most of us, including myself, we are creatures of habit. So we have certain ideas and we do not question many of the ideas that we hold. This, I read this, I did, went through all these 103 great ideas. It took me 3 years to do that, because what I did was I would read it and I would discuss it with a friend, and we would actually debate every aspect of every idea and try to summarize it in our own ways. So it was a lot of work, but it was amazing. It was life-changing experience because it's a way of challenging and examining all your ideas. every idea. Some ideas that, I thought were important and I was already focused on it, and I learned something new from it. Some ideas that I said, okay, why am I studying angel? But then you understand that angels are basically the transmission mechanism from you and God, or you and the best. They are messengers. The concept is messengers, people who are the intermediaries, who transmit something valuable from one to the other. And the value of that in culture and value of that in human life. So there were just a whole range of ideas from all these fields. These are the ideas that are the core ideas that underlie the Western civilization. So what happens is that when you see somebody say something today, you can immediately say, oh, this is where it is coming from. Now, they will not be aware of it. Most of the times, they're not aware of it, but you're able to see the entire pedigree of any idea just like that. You're also able to see all the variations on that and all the varied points. And you're able to kind of think about it in that way. And it's not just about the past, it's by knowing the past that you're able to, with that foil in the background, you're able to see, oh, this has never been said before. This is something genuinely new. You're able to see that and you're able to distinguish that from just another way of saying the same thing that has been said before. So it is a very profound, it was a very profound thing. So I want to open it up for questions very soon. Um, all I will say is that how to read a book will give you the method of doing this. This gives you the content. This is the content of the Western civilization. And this is the cheapest way, the most time effective way of getting it. It's just 8-page essays, 8 to 10, let's say even 10-page, 100 ideas, 1,000 pages, summarizing all of human thought, done fairly well, full of insights, full of connections, and just handed over to you in on a platter. When I started doing my meetups, I did my original, the name of the meetup was 103 Great Ideas. I did meetups on about 50 of these ideas, and I bought up the Syntopicon. On the meetup page, I have a link to the version of it, which is readily available. I use the kind of the older version, which is a 2-volume version, which has, and it's beautiful. If you can get it, it's available in used bookstores or online. What it does is that it starts off, it has an essay. It gives you table of contents at the back where it shows you all the major issues that have been discussed in connection with the idea. It also gives you references into great books. Suppose you think that Aquinas had something interesting to say about beauty, it will tell you exactly where you can find it, and you can just go and read that. To give you an example of one of the ideas, let me just very briefly give you, go through one idea, pick the idea of change. So the idea of presentation on change talks about, firstly, how we learned to measure change in physics. So these are the achievements of people like Galileo in measurement of time, identifying that the pendulum allows you to measure small amount of time, which we could not do before. Measuring of time is a requirement for measuring motion. And then they talk about people like Newton and Leibniz and development of calculus, which allowed us to deal with change and motion. at the first level, for the first time, and really revolutionize the world. Then they talk about change in biology. People lived, moved in just their neighborhood. They didn't move much. So they thought that all the species were fixed, and there were very few species. It's Darwin going to a Galapagos and seeing the massive variety of life that exists and how there is a gradation, just variations in them, and then figuring out that there is change in biology, inspired by his reading of Geology by Lyell, who showed that everyday factors that we see, like wind and water running, or sun, transform, given enough time, can make Grand Canyon. So he took that same idea and applied it to biology, and came up with the idea of evolution by natural selection. So to understand the change in biology, they talk about the psychological change. What does it take to change as a person? They talk about social change. What are the various things that make social change possible? What are the requirements for it? They look at it at a philosophical level. They look at the conflict between Parmenides and Heraclitus. Parmenides holding that change is unreal and it's illusion, whereas Heraclitus holding that there is only change. And so it just goes across. They talk about the Shakespeare, bemoaning the change and how life is lost by time, time under. So it's all these variations of thinking about change. So that's what they do for each idea. They also show you how the idea progresses over time. So I gave a presentation on the concept of honor and how the concept of honor changed from the Greek times to Roman times to Christian times to medieval times to Enlightenment times to modern times, and what are the. You also start to understand the relationships between the idea that something like concept of honor is rest on the concept of morality. And as morality changes, so does the concept of honor. It rests on the concept of what kind of a being is a human being and how that concept changed over time and how concept of honor changed over time. So it's incredible. So I think that this is a crucial tool if you want to educate yourself about how this world works, what are the ideas underpinning this world. And I don't know how somebody can function well and understand and appreciate the world without it. So I recommend both these books very highly. So now I'm going to open it up to questions. Again, you can type an exclamation mark if you have questions. And we'll go from them. You can ask questions about both. If you want, you can ask questions about how to read a book, or you can ask questions about this Syntopicon. So next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Just really quickly, why did they focus on the Western world and not the whole world?
Because it is very difficult, as it is, to get a full perspective on the Western world. The Eastern corpus is very large, and it's not, I mean, for example, Indian corpus, Chinese corpus, I don't know much about, but it's just enormous amount of work. You have to find people who really know it, and then they would have to translate between Eastern and West and connect those things. They are barely able to do that. They were able to do that for the Western world, but they didn't feel that they could do that for the Eastern world. So it's certainly worth doing, and somebody will do it at some point. All right, any more questions? Come on, folks. This is I'm happy to answer any questions. So it's going to be Julie followed by Charles. Julie, go ahead.
Oh, I left the last meeting because I thought I could come out and ask you a question and go back in, and I couldn't. But we didn't know if you presented a question for us in that group. So
Go
for the
ahead.
next group, if there's a question, let us know. But I was wondering if you, as being able to have that broad, you having done that, do you see certain people are saying the same thing? For example, like all cultures have a different wording for the golden rule. I mean, are there certain truths or observations that you are grouping together as, wow, this is resonating? Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are patterns, and what happens is that, and there are many people who have done it in their own way. So, for example, Carl Jung does a lot of this, and the way he does it is to study patterns, study stories across cultures, and say, okay, what are the common themes? And he comes up with the ideas of archetypes, and that's enormously powerful. So there are some patterns that keep coming back, and those are kind of different versions of the same thing. So there is a lot of commonality that goes. At the same time, there are changes, but it's only by knowing the base. So for example, with Industrial Revolution, for the first time, you know, real change started to happen in life. Before Industrial Revolution, life of a grandchild, a grandson, was not that different from life of their grandfather. Things hardly changed, whereas suddenly things started changing, and that has all kinds of implications. So there is kind of, science makes certain things possible. So there are steps, but you are able to understand them. You can say, oh, this is kind of going back to this time. So absolutely. Next up is Charles, Andrea, Jairo, and Jeff.
Yeah, so I got two questions. One is I am currently reading Bertrand Russell's book. I think it's called The History of Western Philosophy. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. If so, can you kind of just talk about how that compares to the Adler's book? That's my first question. And my second question is, since you have read a lot of the classics, has that made you I don't know, this is probably not the most diplomatic way to say it, but
Please.
less impressed with some of the kind of the bestsellers that we have contemporarily? Because if you think mathematically, right, even the bestsellers today, chances are in 10, 20, 30 years, nobody will remember them. Whereas for the classics, they've survived for thousands of years.
Excellent. Both good questions. So I'm not familiar with Bertrand Russell. I tried to read a little bit, but there are many people who are better. My favorite history of philosophy is by a guy called Wonderland. That was done like in 1880s or 1890s. The kind of just the level of analysis, level of thought there is just at a completely different level, and it's much more concise. So I would recommend, if you have to read one, I would recommend that. But I'm not familiar with Bertrand Russell, and I'm much more kind of I mean, Windelband is exceptional, both as a philosopher and being able to do that. But I would not say so. That's that. What was your second question? Just briefly remind me.
Yeah. So my second question is kind of like your personal
Yes.
experience, right?
Yeah.
Having read classics and going back to kind of reading, because that's one of the things I seem to find that some of the popular authors don't seem to be that deep.
Okay, so I would say several things. Okay, I would say yes and no. I don't give, because of this how to read a book approach, I'm able to kind of skim through books. So all these bestseller books, I would kind of very easily skim through. What that does is that it allows and it puts both the mind, quality of the minds of people against each other. And because I've read the classics, I would say, okay, you know what is the level of analysis here? Okay. Having said that, the other part of, okay, there are a few things to remember. One is that, there are a lot of people who produce a lot of stuff in the past, and classics are things that have survived. So there is a lot of chaff even at that time. So that's one thing. Second thing is that the sheer quantity of what is being produced today is mind-boggling, is like orders of magnitude, because you have to realize the literacy level at that time is very low, very small percentage, maybe 10%, I think, if I remember my numbers right, less than that, could read and write. And in terms of actually reading books, before Gutenberg, the biggest library, one of the biggest libraries was the Cambridge Library, and they had 500 copies. This is 500 actual volumes. So just the availability of books, it's so the scale is large. Now, the problem is this, okay? I don't think bestsellers is the right way to evaluate, to find good books. Maybe they are, but maybe not. But the sheer amount of good work that is going on, I think is very large, very, very large. But it's a very, very, very small percentage of what is out there. So the question is, like, occasionally you will find some things which will blow you away. So for example, and it has taken me, it takes time to find it. So for example, thinkers, now I'm talking about people a little bit earlier, like for example, Louis Sullivan or Buckminster Fuller, or recently I've looked at, Akoff, people like that. There are people who kind of blow things away. It's not at the same, some of these people like Louis Sullivan, he certainly compares favorably to everybody in the classics. Buckminster Fuller is pretty close to that. Akoff, probably not so much, okay? The second part is that what you're trying to do is that you're trying to learn. So even if a person, you're trying to learn about our current situation, you're trying to live today, and there are issues today that other people in the past did not face. So even if somebody is giving you something crucial of saying, how do you approach the internet? How do you make most of the internet? Now that is a very powerful question. And even if there is a okay answer to that, take 100 of those answers, put them together. So there is a lot of, so it's not just, so firstly, I'm saying that if I would not be surprised, this is kind of, counterintuitive, but I'm just arguing from numbers. I wouldn't be surprised. So for example, these people have, I think they've covered like 70 thinkers. If you want to talk about thinkers of that caliber, I would not be surprised if there are more than 1,000 people living today who are operating at that level, probably 10,000. I don't think 100,000, but somewhere in that range. It's a very large number of people, but they will probably it won't be bestsellers because they would be busy doing something, but you have to be able to access their areas, speak their terms, find them in order to do that. So I'm very bullish about the present, but it's not through the bestsellers. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. That's really insightful. Can you do you mind spelling out the author for the philosophy book?
Sure, I will do that.
Roughly, yeah.
Next up is I think who had Andrea. Andrea, go ahead.
Oh, I kind of took my hand down, but I'll make a quick comment. It's interesting that this is all really purposeful, which I can see being applied in certain arenas. I just wanted to mention that sometimes for me, there's this massive delight in standing in the current affairs aisle in Barnes and Noble and finding a book on a topic that I would like never look at otherwise. And I have found like remarkably fascinating things that way, although I have had a couple books where I did kind of follow your guideline, and like one book I read recently mentioned a lot of really odd websites, and I checked them all out and they were fascinating. But I did just want to reinforce that, sometimes you just have to go drown in the current affairs aisle at Barnes and Noble, and just the enjoyment of that is kind of palpable. So
yes, people are different. I stay away from it. So, but I can understand that different people have different likes. I think what happens is that typically the news, the current affairs is covered in many ways. You're kind of bombarded with it. I think having a slightly kind of being able to kind of step back, both in time and both in context, is a very powerful way of living. So I'm very much in favor of kind of staying, kind of limiting, at least limiting that, so that you can have a larger perspective, because it is very easy to get carried away with where everybody else is going. So that's why I try to stay away from it. So next up is going to be Jeff, followed by Hyro. Jeff, go ahead.
Srikant, were there any particular subjects covered by Adler there that either were really substantially, really just, bowled you over at the time, and or any that you think might be particularly significant for this era we're in that is so fast changing and consequential?
Great question. So my absolute favorite is language, because I think it's a very deep idea. And there is a lot more. And the other thing is that I also think that I also regard Adler as only a starting point. So what I do is that I do a lot of work on each of those areas. So on language, for example, I have got a lot of other sources which actually build on some of those things in directions. Like, for example, he's covering a certain period, and the idea of language families and how they relate to one another was actually not discovered until later. There are things like the neuroscience of language, which was not discovered. So what I always do is that I use that as a starting point, but it raises so many fascinating questions in terms. So language is my favorite. And second point I was making is that I always have to connect it up with a lot more in the past. I consider this not as an end, but as a beginning of exploration. Now, in terms of its impact for today, that's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think it's in many ways, one of my biggest conclusion is that the epistemological difference between kind of religion, humanities, religion, philosophy, and science is significant. And both, although all of them are trying to do the same thing in some ways, there is differences. So kind of mastering I think largely you get the questions. The questions are more persistent than the answers. They're more useful than the answers. And there are some questions that have come up since, because this is like 1900. So even the Industrial Revolution and this massive expansion of our lifespans, our numbers, our global interaction with the East, all of that has not yet materialized. So all of that has to be added by yourself to it as a starting point to kind of make it relevant to the present. Okay, next up is Hyro. Hyro, you need to unmute yourself. I don't know if you're back. All right, then let's go to Cotton.
Hello. Yes, I had a couple comments, questions. So I love the classics, and I read just a drop in the bucket. But anyway, I recently inherited my mother's, she's a great reader, 63 of those beautifully bound classics. And I was so excited, but I haven't started on one of them. I might have read a few, in my lifetime. But so then I was thinking, how would I ever be able to read all of them in my lifetime, 63? So then recently I was speaking to some native Parisians. Both of them are artists, you know, um, anyway, and they were educated in Europe, right, in the humanities. So I told them, wow, I want to read all the philosophers like Homer, everybody. And they kind of looked at me kind of stupefied. They said, why do you want to read the old philosophers? So I didn't really kind of probe the reason for all that. Like, why don't you read the new thing? Which gets me thinking, like, do I really need to read all of those classic books, which I would love to read? Or would I gain a lot of the insights from getting like the nth hand knowledge, you know, from their descendants? You know,
Excellent question.
mm,
So I would say is that firstly, definitely recommend that you read these great ideas, which is like summary of which actually gives you an overview of this entire conversation. So it's the most effective, just 1,000 pages of going through what everybody has to say on everything, not just philosophers, but scientists, novelists. So that's the most effective way. So that's first point. Second point is that you definitely need to understand the ideas because modern philosophers, I mean, I'm very disappointed with most of them. I don't think they're even, I think philosophy is pretty much given up. So different disciplines kind of grow and die. And especially academic philosophy is pretty much dead, I think. So just because something is new doesn't mean that it is something. So I would definitely look at, um, you know, so that's one thing. Second, so just because it is new, you shouldn't do that. What the looking at history of ideas does is that it gives you the context and the present. So you're able to see, like most of the people are just repeating the same ideas, and
mm.
only few of them have something new to say, and you're able to make those distinctions. So that's another reason to know that. So I don't think you can really. I strongly disagree with those Christian folks. Jeff, you had a follow up.
Yes, so I'm curious as to, given your, extensive study of all of them, were there any areas that you thought you might, continue to study yourself in order to add to the contributions that were chronicled there?
I mean, I'm going in multiple directions. That's a great question. I mean, the way in which my mind works is I always try to organize everything. I've always have these diagrams that I use as a way of kind of summarizing everything that I know. So I started with this 4-function model. And thanks to my study of systems, I've dramatically simplified it. And that's what I'm going to be talking about on Saturday at 12:30. Um, the basic idea, to give you a little bit of spoiler, is that I think that man is a designing animal. That idea of design is crucial to understanding what a human being is and what human being does. And this is the concept of design as kind of being central to what makes us uniquely human, and how that designing process utilizes our rational deliberative faculty on one hand, the intuitive faculty on the other hand, and how it drives actions and how it uses those feedback loops from the action. So design as being kind of the core in the center with those 3 spokes going out, pushing towards action and then getting feedback both from the intuitive faculty and the deliberative faculty. That's my current summary, and that how it operates at the individual level and how it interacts with your culture. So I have that kind of mapped out, and so I'm doing an entire series now on I'm calling it Principles Project, of kind of identifying core principles that we live by, and I'm going to start that off this Saturday at 12:30. So hope you guys can make it. So let me see. Next up is Julie, followed by Jairo.
Yeah, you know, it seems people look at the world and this is what's going on. This is the problem. This is why the problems are here. And then there's a whole movement towards recovery or healing or freedom, getting conscious, a life that works for you, happiness, success. Is there anybody that you really think over time, through everything you've read, who really sees a problem correctly, and would carry it into the present, or that you think really has a hand on what heals or what frees people?
Okay, excellent question. So firstly, I would say don't look for just one person. You have to look at like a whole class of people who can actually deliver that. And I've studied many folks. I mean, my favorite thinker is Louis Sullivan, who is an architect. And my favorite book is Kindergarten Chats. That's the book that I liked so much, and that I bought like 32 copies. I gave it to everybody whom I thought was anybody worthwhile. And I was shocked that only 1/3 of them thought that they completely changed their life. And something like, maybe 1/3 of them were saying, what is this? So I had to I rewrote the whole thing, so that, edited it, removed the versions, anything that was confusing. And so for me, his idea of form follows function, which also is another way of saying that design, you design things according to requirements, is the most powerful idea that I have come across. Next, which I can use at any scale, at any time, and it always produces just stunning results. So that's what I would recommend if I had to recommend one thinker. But at the same time, I recommend, starting with something like, getting used to how to read a book so you can access many people, because different people can offer different things to you. Carl Jung is very deep. And what I do is that I do meetups on these things, which enable people who are new to the ideas to ramp up on them, get inspired to examine them more. At the same time, have conversations between people who have been studying it for a long time, so we can have a higher level of knowledge for everybody. All right, next up is Jairo.
Yes, thank you for presenting this and the great ideas. And I was wondering if one were to work with a friend to go through some great ideas, is there a preferred sequence? Is it based on history, like a historical progression that shows how philosophers built upon previous ideas? Is that
Sure. So what Adler has done is that he has identified 103 great ideas that cover all of human knowledge, and then for each of the idea, they give you everything that has been said about it. So if you want to work on it, I would just get that. There is a link to it on the Meetup page for this meetup. It's called The Great Ideas by Mortimer Adler. So you just get that, and you can pick. I would recommend. It's a lot of work. So there are multiple ways. When I was working with a friend, we decided to do it in alphabetical order, because we wanted to take in the whole thing. We're committed to going through the whole thing, and we wanted not to have any kind of preconception of which ones are important, which ones are not important. So we went through the whole thing. But if, it depends on styles of people. So suppose what I would recommend, as you're not familiar with it, pick any idea that you think is worthwhile, that you're interested in, and just focus on those. So pick but don't just look at one, maybe look at 5 of them, all of which you are interested in, and try to pick ideas which are very different from each other. That would be a very good way of starting. And so that's my quick answer to that. So now, folks, I would like to know what you guys thought, and just kind of let's do takeaways very quickly. So I'm going to call on people in the order in which I see them, and you can go ahead and tell me what you thought. If you would rather not do it, you can just put skip in the chat. So next up is going to be David Roller, followed by Dave, Joe, and Paul. David Roller, go ahead.
So I found this concept very interesting and very useful if I was doing, say, like a comprehensive research on a subject. But I find it a little constraining or a little potentially overwhelming if I'm just looking to do general reading for broadening my overall knowledge and potentially developing an interest in an area. Not that something that I want to focus deeply into, but maybe just get a overall conceptual understanding that I can return to at a few. So I guess one of the things I like to read, but I like to widely change the subject matter from one area to another. But what I do find interesting is as I'm reading something completely and totally unrelated, I may find overlaps or intersections.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my thoughts there.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Next up is Joe, Paul, and let's figure out the next one. Joe, go ahead.
The main takeaway is I and I think you mentioned it earlier in the discussion, is that I do think that this is the most effective way of reading and learning. Just to build a little bit on what David just said, it's and it's very efficient as well. It's both effective and efficient, but I do see where the spontaneity in reading sometimes that can spur an idea that you wouldn't have otherwise had may be lost because you're kind of almost, it's like a commercialization process. It's probably the most effective way to learn and to gather your thoughts, and gather as many perspectives as possible. But yeah, I think that there's always something lost whenever you institute an approach of sorts. But I also think the rules that they give you, the framework that they give you in order to read these, to read it more effectively is very powerful. So thank you for sharing it. It is a change, a life-changing book. That's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Paul, Jairo, and Julie. Paul?
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Shrikant. So first of all, if you will be getting rid of your library, can you let me know? I would definitely be interested into.
No, unfortunately, it's already done. I had 1,700 books, and I decided to pare it down to about 300. And I got, friends from my Meetup come, and they took, one of my very close friends took like 350. I called him first because I know that he would pick, and I showed him all the best books, and he bought all of them. So if they are sitting in his library, so I can go and look at it anytime I want. So
too bad, because back in old country, I had about 3,000. Here I have about 500, 600 books, but I wouldn't mind to have more of the stuff. And I know that yours, what you had in your library, I definitely would be very interested. And anyway, with 20 million books, I would have to read about 650 books a day in my lifetime, but no, I'm not able to do that, even that I am pretty good speed reader. And anyway, with regards, I think Charles was asking about history of philosophy. Definitely better than Russell. I would recommend Durant or Kenny. Wittgenstein is very good, but he's ending in end of 19th century, as far as I remember. That regards the new philosophers, what do you think about Chalmers, Nagel, Nussbaum or Dennett, they're still reasonably, they are all involved in the consciousness, and which is quite important for me, at least, quite important subject in modern philosophy. So I don't think that I would completely say, as you said, that there is nothing new coming in philosophy. That's just small disagreement, that nothing like that. And I honestly admire your optimism that you are trying to explain people synoptical reading. Anybody who wants to get to any kind of knowledge has to be synoptical reader. There is no other way to get to any level. But you are unbelievable optimist. You think that you can push it on people, or that people will learn it. Unless they have system, it's very difficult for them to comprehend what you are showing.
Yeah, and the whole idea of these meetups is that I can just present it to people, I'll say, hey, this is interesting, Carl Jung is interesting, look, this is interesting, look. Now it's up to people, maybe. But what happens is that I do believe that some people will pick up some element of it, just one element of it, and that still would be useful to them. There are few people who would get very excited, like Joe, for example. When I told him about this, he just picked it up and he just started reading it.
Joe is the best.
Right. So it's like, so there is going to be variation, and all of it actually I get benefit from. So I have a kind of a long range view, and I'm putting this up on YouTube also. So there are people who are going to say, are going to watch it maybe 3 years from now and say, hey, maybe I should read this. And it may just, what I'm saying is I'm looking at it long term. So there is a lot of benefit to be gotten from that. But thank you very much.
And I thank you for putting it on the YouTube, because I went back to, before I started with 52, I went back to some of those, some of your YouTube videos, which I didn't see before I started with you guys.
And the best thing that I'm hoping for, which I think will also happen, is that people who have built on these methods, just like me, I've been doing this. There are a whole bunch of other people out there who've been doing it on their own way. So when I get to have conversations with them, I'm going to pick up some tricks, even further tricks, that is going to, just accelerate what I'm doing as well, because I am very disappointed of my ability of, getting to information. I try, but there is a lot more that can be done. I think I'm leaving a lot on the table. So I really need to figure out how to take these methods and do it fully for the internet age. I think I'm not even like 5% of what it can be. So that's what I'm hoping. That's my big hope, that I'll figure it out. And I'm hoping to partly to do this by talking here. It's like, just when you kind of say, okay, look, this is where I'm weak, immediately your mind starts to work on that. So it's kind of, both internal and external and social and individual at the same time. Next up is Julie, Jairo, and Kate. Julie, go ahead.
I just want to say again, I've, looked at tutorials on YouTube or tried to learn something so that hopefully I will find something that resonates with me. And I just have to say that your forum and looking at some of your past things is such a wonderful way to find a lot of different things that resonate at the same time and get your brain stimulating and really realizing how much we don't know and how ambitious this is. And the rest of the world that doesn't seem to care how it works, I don't know what that says, but I'm not going to worry about that.
No. I mean, there is a lot more people out there who value it, and over time, I'm just focused right now on doing a good job of doing these meetups, creating great content, and over time, people will find it. So, right. And whoever wants it can have it.
Before this, I did TED Talks. That's about the best I could find it before you came along. So,
wonderful. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate it. Next up is Jairo, Brian, and Jeff. Jairo, go ahead.
Yes. If you maybe might consider showing, I don't know if there's some challenges to doing it this way, but maybe you could put a series of because you were saying that you'd be interested in doing something about Indian philosophy of mind, that you might consider some of these lectures by J.L. Garfield. He's highly regarded because he's one of the few that understands Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy. He's actually written books on some really complex Buddhist ideas. And
No, Jairo, I appreciate that. But the thing is that, see, my method is like looking at every source. Now, with Indian philosophy, I have some advantages. I can actually read Sanskrit. So I'll probably go and read kind of original, not very well. I get maybe about 90% of the words. And so I will take like I'm also very good at Marathi, which is a language which is derived from Sanskrit. So the way I read Sanskrit is I use Sanskrit with Marathi translation. So I get like 90% from Sanskrit itself and so when I choose to do that, I'll probably go to the original sources. I'm a very big fan of going to the original sources. So that's what I would need to do.
I'm thinking in terms of a presentation in 52 Living the Ideas.
I don't know.
You could have us watch some of these videos on the meaning of life, is what the course is called. Because it includes Aristotle, but it also goes into the Gita and other things.
So Jairo, you can send me the link.
And I put the link already in the chat room.
Sure, you can send it by Meetup thing, and I'll have a look. Okay. Next up is Brian, followed by Jeff. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, a very interesting evening again. I really liked the first part. I have read several books on how to read more effectively. And sometimes it's harder getting through those, and it is sort of continuing as I am. But I kind of like the ideas in this one. I've already got a copy, so I'll be following up that and trying to put it in practice more and more.
Excellent.
The second part, I don't know if I took the link or I found it somewhere, but I've just got a PDF copy of Adler's book, 11,000 or 1,100 pages. So it's going to take me a while to get through that.
Yes, and yeah, the good thing is that it will start paying off 8 pages at a time. So like you can pick any section, any idea, which is just 8 to 10 page essay on it, and you will start getting tremendous value from it. And I would go by interest, so you can pick any concept that you find interesting, and it's just accretive. So it's not like a book where you have to read 1,000 pages to get a value. It's like every 10 pages is going to blow your mind.
I've already opened up the section on evolution, so we'll see how I go.
Excellent. So one other thing I would say about it, though they try very hard to handle science, they are relatively weak at it. So what I had to do when I was studying it for the first time, I had to read entries from Encyclopedia Britannica on history of science to make sure they actually cover scientists. Okay, they try their best. Their section on evolution is pretty good. Okay, but what I'm saying is that I'm very familiar with science, so my standards are higher, and I found that they were much better at dealing with humanities and doing some basic connections with science. So I had to independently go and read. I went and read originals of like Faraday, Newton, Darwin, in order to kind of make sure that I was getting the deepest insights. Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it. Next up is Jeff, Christian, and Kevin. Jeff, go ahead.
So, Shrikant, I want to tell you how excited I am to hear your sessions on design, because I think you're right. I think that brings together so many different functions in a dynamic way, and so I'm very excited about that. I agree with you. And then second, I think it would have made you laugh if you could see my office, that I have hundreds of books from the training programs I've done over the last 20 years. But to do this one little session on productive disagreement, I pulled out over 30 books just to try to pick the things. Now, I've taught this for years, but I decided, okay, let's kind of start again, and ended coming down to about 7 books. And out of those 7 books, there's no more than about 2 or 3 points in each of those books for the 20 or so points in this session. And it required kind of a ruthless evaluation of how those points might fit together in a linear way and balance the knowledge with the actions and behaviors that could fit. And so in a very real way, it was a design process. And anyway, if you do a speed up video of me and what my office looks like right now, you would see that process in action.
Wonderful, wonderful, Jeff. And so Jeff, so Saturday we have a blockbuster program. So at 12:30 I'll be presenting on man as a designing animal, and this is the start of the Principles Project. And at 2:30, Jeff will be talking about handling our differences. How do you handle it when there are fundamental differences? And he has incredible things to say. He has a lot of experience on that. So really looking forward to that. So that's coming up on Saturday, folks. So next up is going to be Christian and Mike. Christian, go ahead.
I just started reading the book, so I haven't really gotten the skills into practice yet. So that's why I really wanted to make sure to watch the YouTube video online and also come in for tonight for this meetup. And I'm really glad that I did, because I got a chance to talk in the breakout rooms. And Mike really was very helpful during the breakout room. So yeah, I'm really excited to start doing some topical reading. I really wish I knew this at college, but better late than never. So yeah, thank you so much for presenting this book and sharing it with all of us.
Absolutely. And Christian, don't regret it so much, because education is wasted on the young. I think that's, you have the context now with which to evaluate things, and you will be able to do actually so much more with it. So, so anyway, Mike, you're next. Mike, are you there? All right. So folks, thank you so much. This was delightful, and hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.